I wanted to start, well, today I'm going to talk about the local perspective, what it's like as a young parent and their children living in Cornwall. Talk about some of the data, talk about some of the initiatives that are already going on to address some of the problems they face, and then talk a bit about what we're going to do together this afternoon to look at it in more detail and come up with some practical responses to what we can do in our own working lives. But first, I want you to take a step back in time and remember what it felt like to be 17. Now, my 17-year-old daughter, well, this was a few years ago, when my daughter was 17, I thought I'd done a great parenting job. You know, I'd learnt it at work, I knew all this stuff. And she said she was going to cook some mashed potatoes. And I watched her, and she chopped the potatoes into reasonable sizes, put them in a pan of water, and then got the potato masher out and tried to mash them before cooking them. Now, I was like, what are you doing? She was like, well, I'm mashing them. She really thought that potatoes were mashed before they cooked. Was that my poor parenting? Was it her youth? I don't know. I would have thought she knew enough to be able to apply her learning from other areas to these potatoes, but she didn't. When I was 17, I could mash potatoes, but I wasn't very good at keeping myself safe. And one of my favourite things to do with my friend Anna was to get very drunk in Truro, and then we used to go to the old city hospital if we didn't have anywhere to stay for the night, and we'd go around trying all the doors of the cars, and quite often people would leave their boots open because the keys were not for the whole car back then, so we'd sleep in the boots of the doctors, and sometimes they'd open their boot and we'd be like, hi, but very drunk. Wasn't very good. Now to me, my Alice, my daughter, I thought she'd be all right looking after a baby, but after the potato incident, not so sure. Me, I looked after loads of babies when I was 17 and probably wasn't the best at it. So if we can just have 1 minute where you just stand up off your seat and turn to your neighbour and tell them one of the silliest things that you have done at the age of 17 that would make you not suitable to look after a baby. Go on then, you've got 1 minute, no soul bearing, just what would make you unsuitable at the age of 17? Okay, round it up and sit down again. Nice and quiet. You are a right rowdy lot. Imagine all of you looking after a baby at 17. Some of you might well have been parents at 17. But I'd say collectively, it's a bit of a worry, isn't it? And so what we need to remember, I'm going to talk about some of the challenges faced by young parents in Cornwall, but let's remember how old they are. All the new data and information, all the science is saying our brains are still growing well into our 20s. Some are even saying up to the age of 30 now. And yet we're expecting these young people to be able to perform the job of a professional grown-up. Okay, young parents in Cornwall, as Alison said, really reduced the number of teenage conceptions. But what we found at Wild is that those young people that aren't getting pregnant anymore are the ones that kind of made our work a bit more measured, a bit more varied, who perhaps had family support. What we're left with is what we call the hardcore young parents, who have always been there and probably always will be some of these young people going forward in time. We currently work with about 250 families each year. Of them, just over half, we work with the young dad as well as the young mum, but there's still half of those young dads missing from our service. And obviously we work with all their children as well. If you look at their demographics, their ethnicity is roughly the same as the rest of Cornwall. The average age of the mums is 18, the average age of the dads is 22. And our range for age of mums goes from about 14 up to 23. But our range for age of dads goes from 15 up to 51. And that's this year. So we've always got a smattering of young women with much older partners. And we find that they are overrepresented in those with the highest level of risk. In terms of education, most of them have left school without any qualifications. If they have got qualifications, they have some basic level 1s, level 2s. And I know Young Mums Will Achieve do some great work to try and address that. In terms of sexual health, lots of ours take risks. And I'm really pleased that the child sexual exploitation strategy that's just going around in its draft form is looking at young people right up to the age of 25 now, because we've been clamouring for a couple of years going, actually they don't stop being exploited on their 18th birthday. So we have those that are over the age of 18 who are still being sexually exploited and who aren't using condoms and barrier methods of contraception, and who are often not using LARC either, which is the long-acting reversible contraception. So that's our families. If you have a little look, I'm going to call this baby Milo, but he's a real baby, and that's what I want to try and get through this next 40 minutes or so. Think of the real baby at the heart of these families. That's not a stock image. None of our images are stock images. That is a real baby living in Cornwall this year. And what does it feel like to be Milo? What's Milo's family experiencing? Toxic trio, I am assuming that everyone in the room has heard that term to describe the 3 areas of risk that are often present when there's a serious case review, when there's been a death or a serious injury to a child. Our mums and dads at Wild, so we're talking 250 families a year, look at the mental health statistics there. They have been going up and up and up on an annual basis. And these are the young parents that we're working with that are getting some kind of clinical help for their mental ill health, which would suggest to me that we aren't really working with anyone who doesn't have a mental ill health problem. And you can see the dads there are nearly up to the same amount of mental ill health problems as the mums. So it's always been known about postnatal illness, that young parents are much more at risk, and that those young mums are more likely to have postnatal depression and anxiety. But we've got a significant number now who've got much more complex health conditions. We've got about 6% of our young mums getting a bipolar diagnosis, another 6% having a PTSD diagnosis, and then the young dads who previously were overlooked in our data as well as national data around mental ill health are nearly up to the 80%. So that's 4 out of every 5 families. That child is growing up with both parents having mental ill health. And then we look at substances. The way that our young parents are using substances has slightly changed. There's more use of whatever those new spice and that kind of stuff going on. But there's a lot of drug dealing going on in the families that we work with as a way of making ends meet in this time of austerity. And I'd like to go back to what Jack said about governmental neglect. Absolutely, yes. I know that Ray's presentation about Baby P and how the media and politics changed that has had an impact on that spike. But austerity is the other big factor there. It is very hard to look at neglect and expect to hold people to account as individuals when they are dealing with such huge challenges that our society is not supporting them with. And then to hold them individually responsible when really we are all responsible, and our government is responsible for the deaths of people and for babies and children experiencing neglect and harm. That's just what I think personally. We've also got, in terms of substances as well, 1 in 4 of our young dads is having support for addiction. That is ridiculous. 1 in 4 young men doesn't have a problem with addiction, but 1 in 4 of our young dads has problems with addiction. So those problems in that family home are really complicated. Then you bring in domestic abuse, and we have a smattering of what you'd call that kind of I think it's now known as intimate family terrorism. Yes, thank you. But we have a huge amount of situational family conflict. And when you look at the challenges that are facing these young men and women, no wonder. So we've got over half experiencing domestic abuse going on currently. So that's their current experience, and many more of them have experienced it as a child. When we look at domestic abuse data in Cornwall, the majority of perpetrators are men, and a third of perpetrators are under the age of, I think it's under the age of 35, but they're young men. And the highest risk group for domestic abuse, to be a victim of domestic abuse and of sexual violence in Cornwall, is young women. So you kind of put those things together, and our young families have high rates with toxic trio. Then we've got their care experience. There's a known link nationally between young people being in care, and then when they leave care, they're very likely to become a young parent, and you can see that that is absolutely borne out in Cornwall. Again, when you think of brain development, and one of the campaigns that Wild is going to be starting on a national scale is looking at a protected status for young parent families, for their babies and for the young mums and dads. When we think about young people in care, we're now pushing those boundaries for the local authority and for multi-agency to support those children and young people until they're in their 20s. When actual fact, if you look at the experience in the UK of young parents and their children, their outcomes are really similar, and the lives they've lived before they had their children are really similar. So actually we think there's a really strong case for a protected characteristic or status around young parenthood. Disability, we've got high rates of physical disability amongst our young mums, but if you look at the dads, sensory disability, so those are all autism spectrum disorder, and if you look at that, that's 14% of our dads. Again, that's an overrepresentation of an experience within that cohort. Really high rates of dyslexia. We think they're probably higher than that. And we also have, I think, let me check, 11% of young dads experiencing conduct disorders as well. So all of the data from here is really backing up what Alison is saying in that national picture. Then relationships. Just over half of our families live separately. The parents live separately. And you can see that just over half of mums identify as lone parents, 15% of dads identify as lone parents, but only 4% of dads are the main carer for their children. And it's a bit complicated, this one, because when you look at it, you're like, how does that all work? 40% of them are single, but only 15% say they're lone dads. Their families are complicated. So when they are living together when the dads are living together with, they're not considering themselves single, it might not be with the mother of their child. And so families become very complicated and interlinked. And in Cornwall, we have patterns where we have families interlinked across all the towns as well. But the important thing for me is that a third of dads there don't have regular access or contact with their children, a third. And we are mainly working with children under the age of 2, which means that those dads are becoming absent from their children's lives. And if you think how many, Alison said, are registered when that baby's born, that means in that first year of life, the dads are falling by the wayside and they are disappearing from that baby's life. Criminal justice, we were talking about prisons earlier, but you can see just over 40% of young dads as perpetrators, and then some as victims as well. And then the young mums mainly as victims or by family association. But that still means that the criminal justice involvement is seen as a normal part of life and culture for the families we work with. We've, at the moment, got contact with about 6 young men in Exeter Prison who are all there for violent offences. And our families talk about crime and people being in prison and illicit behaviours as a regular part of their day-to-day lives. Got to check the time. Okay, housing. Serena, our commissioner, is here today somewhere, and this is something we've been talking a lot about, how how the housing picture for young parents and their children in Cornwall has changed over the last 15 years. If you go back 15 years ago to the height of Sure Starts and all the wonderful things and support that families could have then, 85% of our families were living in social housing, where they had a protected tenancy, where they had support from that social housing provider. Now, if you look, not even half of the families are living in social housing, which is a huge area of support. I don't think is there anyone from housing here? No. So it's kind of, it feels to me like it's less organised because there are all these different providers, and then you've got private landlords in there as well. But if you look, if less than half of our families are living in social housing, and you'll see from that that there are less dads living in social housing than mums. And when you look at where else they're living, the dads are much more likely to be living in overcrowded homes with their wider birth families. And that means that they haven't really got anywhere suitable to care for their children. Then you'll see caravans. We have had a tent, that was for a young dad who was an adult. But street homeless, having that proportion of young dads that are street homeless, usually with addiction issues when they're street homeless, and sofa surfing. So if we're asking dads to be equal partners in parenting their children and they're separated from that mother, how can they care for their children if they're living on the street? How can they take their baby and have really positive contact time with their baby when they're sofa surfing at their friend's house who's a drug dealer? How is that possible? And so we're asking the unattainable of our young people. This one's gone up massively, absolutely massively. There have always been a larger number of young parents that smoke than the average population. But if you think Generation Sensible, that's who we are working with now. The lowest rates of drinking and smoking and drug taking that there have been since Moses. Certainly since my childhood. But look at how many of them are smoking. It's huge. Now think about why babies are born preterm to young parents. They're born at low birth weight. They are far more likely than nearly every other group to die of sudden infant death. Smoking is a massive factor there. And we can see that for the mums, current smokers is well over 50%, but for the dads, nearly all of them are smoking, and most of them have been smokers at some point. And the best we ever got was 43% of families where there were smokers, but this is a significant increase, and this really worries us, because for us it's a barometer of how stressed out people are feeling. Linking that to the spikes in mental ill health as well. All the stop smoking, the smoking cessation work that we can do when your life feels like it's chaos around you. For a lot of our families, they're like, it's all we've got left is our fags. And it's not expensive. They're not smoking legal tobacco. They're smoking very, very cheap tobacco. So that the fallacy of that, that they're wasting their money, they're not. It hardly costs them anything. And so you have all these so you've got the mental ill health, domestic abuse rates, all of them rising over the last few years, smoking rates rising, substance use rising. Some of the stuff that I haven't said that has risen is use of food banks. So we have 50 odd, I can't remember, just over half of ours are relying on food banks. We also operate Fair Share, where we get lots of food from all the supermarkets. And we're giving out masses of food on a daily basis, and people are living on this food. So all of those needs, crisis funding, everything has skyrocketed as a direct result of austerity measures. And then this is what you get. Just over 1 in 4 of our wild children has a safeguarding intervention, supported by all of you. Nearly 1 in 5 subject to care proceedings or removal. That is a ridiculous rate and much higher than it used to be. And then about a quarter have had a pre-birth assessment or other type of social work assessment. And I say it's ridiculous, it's much higher, but talking to Alison earlier, actually what we've seen, because we go back 26 years, when we go back to the beginning of Wild, John Major was in power, and it was like that then. Then we had a period where there were sure starts and where there was lots of investment in local opportunities and support for people, so that I can remember a young mum saying, when I had my first baby, I could go to Liscudget, which is the children's centre as then in Penzance, every day. I could access a dentist there, I could see my health visitor, I could meet up with my CPN, we could go to the cafe every day. She spent all day at the children's centre meeting different people, making her own friendship group. And then when those services are reduced, we've gone straight back to those figures that we had in the Major days. So it's really clear to me why this is happening. And when we're talking about neglect, it's very hard as practitioners to think how, because neglect is neglect to the baby. It doesn't matter whether their parent isn't providing for them and caring for them because they've got all these other problems going on. The baby is still feeling neglected and is hungry or sore or tired or scared. That feeling is the same no matter why it happens. And so how do we as practitioners work with that when we know that family hasn't got recourse to the resources they need, both emotional and physical, to provide for their child? And this is from a young mum. I can't cope with them all. She had 3 children. She has 3 children. I thought Matt would stay, and that was the father of her 3rd child. And there's no way I would have had an abortion. I wish I had social back again. So actually, when we're looking at, we talk about how young people think about social services. This young woman wants them and appreciates them and is feeling so alone once she's left with these children. And I think I can't remember if it was Alison or Ray that was saying about how we think of the lived experience of the child, but these are children themselves, or they are very young people whose brains are still developing. How do we get inside their shoes and think what it feels like to be that young person, to feel so hopeless? Let me just check I'm not missing anything out. So I've got, just talk amongst yourselves for a minute. Okay, and then the next one. This is a young dad. I'll read it out because I don't know if you can see it very well, but I feel as if I just need someone there to tell me it's going to be all right more than anything. Tell me it's not the end of the world, where for me it feels like it is. That was a young dad who felt like all the professionals were judging him and saying that what he brought to the table was risk. He didn't bring strengths, he didn't bring resources, he brought risk. And so he felt like his world was at an end when he was about to become a father. What can we do for young men to take them from being seen as risk to being seen as a resource? And I just, with his permission, I want to tell you a story about a young man called Ollie, who I met a few months ago. And Ollie openly told me that he'd harmed his own baby. He didn't mean to, he'd harmed his daughter. And he's now a peer mentor with our project, and he's done a lot of work, not just with us. He's led the work, but he's done a lot of work with social care and with his family worker and with his mental health support to actually look at what's going on for him that led to him harming his child. And he explained it really well. He said, I've got an attachment disorder, and that's because my dad used to beat me up when I was a child, and my mum didn't really pay me any attention, and then she left. And then he explained really well about how that plays out in how he has a trauma response to times of stress and how he now manages that. And he leads other young men and supports them. He's befriending other young men who are going through the same process where they're not allowed to see their children. And he's using artwork. He's just doing all this amazing stuff. And what he brings, he says, I love her more than anything in the world. And I just needed to learn how to cope with being me. And his story just really got to me. Another one that's quite a cute one is 17-year-old Brad. He said, well, I like Andrew, who's his dad's worker, because he said, I've been having real problems with my relationship, real problems, we're always arguing. And then Andrew gives me some hints about what to do. And then I go and do them and it works. And it's just beautiful. He's 17, he's the same age as my daughter who couldn't mash a potato, you know, and he's trying to be a dad. And I wanted to add to the idea of surveillance and sidelining that you talked about, Alison, about that young dads feel they're under surveillance or that they're being sidelined. I'd like to say exclusion is the third one of that our young dads, it's far easier for us if we just make them go away. And I've said this at these sort of things before, we need to stop just making them go away. We need to stop holding the young mum accountable for the young dad's behaviours, but we also need to hold that young dad accountable for his behaviours and support him to discover and build on his strengths. Instead of saying, you're a risk, so the easiest thing is to exclude you from your child's life. All the research is saying it is possible to go beyond that and bring him back in as a resource and find a level of redemption. And certainly the project in Leeds uses that as a model, and that's what we should be doing. I know Ben is here somewhere. Yeah, doing work around dads, and it's just brilliant that social care are looking at leading work with dads for us in Cornwall and supporting our dads project, and really, because we've been saying dads, dads, dads for blooming years and not really done very much about it and not really put any resources into it. We can't keep ignoring them. This one, I'm going to read this one through because this is the lived experience of a very young mum. I just feel like giving up. I can't do it no more. I'm supposed to be fighting for my son, so her son's in care, and I can't see him knowing I'm drinking most days and now he'll probably go. I know I can't fight for him when I've done so many stupid things. I don't want to be pregnant. She was pregnant again, especially when I'm trying to fight to get my son back, but I'm lonely and I'm bored. At night when I feel really lonely, I want some affection. I want to feel cared for. I know it's not the way and they don't really like me and I don't really like myself, but it's better than nothing. This is a young woman who was sexually abused systematically through several years of her childhood and then went into various care placements and then back to family care, had no supportive family, no network of friends, and was meeting up with men that she met on the internet and meeting them for sex in the middle of the night in the towns that she was placed in. Imagine being 17 and all the silly things you said you got up to when you were 17, and imagine that that is your life and the nearest you can get to love is to meet up with strangers from the internet in the streets in the dark. Okay. So, our esteemed government, the Health and Social Care Select Committee, which is a group of MPs from all parties that meet together to advise the government on best policy, have just released the 1,000, is it called the 1,000 days report. So they're saying it's really, really important to get in early. But they're also saying this is a direct quote from our government's committee: improved surface provision, which is what we're all trying to do, will provide only a sticking plaster if the underlying circumstances in which some children grow up, particularly the poorest, are not improved. So that slide is a recognition. Our government is recognising it. We need to recognise it, that we're doing this work in a really difficult environment. Expecting that by putting our tiny interventions in is going to have a massive impact in a short time is too optimistic. We have to realise that for families, having supportive services isn't enough when they haven't got enough money to feed their children, they haven't got a roof over their head, they haven't got the basic needs and resources to be able to build a healthy, happy, safe life for their children. And the government recognises that themselves. They're also saying children and families who may need targeted support should be identified at the earliest opportunity, especially during pregnancy, and especially during, well, actually they're saying preconception and antenatally. And it's interesting because there's another report out called, I don't know if anyone in early years has seen the 4 competencies report, which is looking at what children need from antenatal and birth in the first 2 years. And they're saying all the work we do to address things like speech and language, where children are having delays, should be done before the age of 1. It should be done antenatally and before the age of 1. When do we offer speech and language support in general in Cornwall? I know we've got a speech and language person. What's the sort of age that you'd normally go in?
2+, unless there's complex needs.
2+. We did a little survey amongst our... Does anyone know how many words you should be able to say by the time you get to the age of 2? Any ideas to shout out? Come on. Too shy. Come on. Just pick a number. 50? 100 and something. I'm going to check with my speech and language, but it's about 200. About 200 at the age of 2. We did a little survey amongst the children we currently had in our creches in that week. Average for the 2-year-olds, 10. 10 words. When they should be saying 200 words and starting to string them together and understanding those words. Hence, the children of young parents starting school, 11 months delay. Imagine starting 11 months delay when you're only 4. So that targeted support early, and yet we offer our services at 2+, when all the research is saying it needs to be offered before the age of 1. Why are we doing that? The government released that, after that report was released, it came from NHS England and local governments, said, yay, we're going to address this by getting health visitors to do targeted and to give more support at the 2-year-old health check. It's crazy out there. But we are doing some early stuff. Certainly where I work, we've got Dad's work going on. We've got our Building Futures project for young women who are having children removed. We've got an infant mental health project looking at doing that work at the very earliest stage possible. And we're just going to start a new project looking at adverse childhood experiences, of which 80% of our families we know have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. Those are the ones we know about. And then if you look at some of the work that other people are doing in sexual health, they're looking at how we can offer the LARC option in a different way for young parents. And then brilliantly, and it's not formal yet, but the new pathway for young parents in Cornwall is going to offer a real chance of putting in place certainly the first 3 steps of the pathway that Alison showed us there. Giving enhanced support for all young parent families from the first point that they come through our doors in midwifery. So our midwifery and health visiting colleagues have done a huge amount of work and are working closely in partnership with social care, early help and the rest of us to do that. So Cornwall is pretty special. We are already part of the way there. So I don't want you to feel like it's hopeless, even though it's just very, very miserable. So we're partway there with the first 3 steps. There were a lot of other steps, though, and certainly we don't need to invent a framework. There's already a manual out there. The framework that Alison talked about that's being renewed currently for teenage parents, that framework lays it all out. We've even got one of the guys that wrote it working in Cornwall, Michael Priestley. So it's kind of like it's there. It tells us all what we need to do to make the best service we can. We just need to act on it. And that's why people like Add Action and people from adult care, mental health need to be at the table as well, because the manual is there for them all. Okay. Does anyone know where this comes from? The child, for the full and harmonious development of his or her personality, should grow up in a family environment in an atmosphere of happiness, love and understanding. Does anyone know where that's from? No? Oh, you dimwits, full of dimwits. It's from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. The convention also says that our government should be providing good health for our children, education, equality of access to play and love and family life. It's not happening. This is their right. And this is what I just so passionately believe this, that we need to stop thinking it's just a process and a system. This is their right. It's their human right. Little Milo, the mums and dads that are still children, it's their human right to have this harmonious development, not scraping by on food bank, harmonious development, so that they can bring to the table of our communities everything that they can possibly be. We have wild graduates that are builders and bakers and journalists, health visitors. We have a writer for The Guardian, we have fitness instructors, bouncers, every profession, everything. We have friends and mums and grands. These are our future community. One of our babies could be the one that has the brains and the science to work out how to solve our environment problems. We need to put our effort and our time and our resources into these people. Just 10 minutes, I got 10 minutes, right. That's the end of me banging on about that. And then I've now got to talk about the saddest part of all, which is that there have been 2 rapid reviews recently in Cornwall of children that were seriously injured with life-changing injuries. And they were both children of young parents. And when we look back over the last few years, the huge majority of babies that have died or been seriously injured because of abuse have been the children of young parents. And although they are a few, they are still lives that could have lived to their full and harmonious potential. And I also don't want to forget that alongside those babies who have died or been injured, there are also 2 young dads who lost their lives as part of that whole experience and incidents. So several lives that have been wasted and have been brought to an end far too soon. And we are battling against, within austerity, we're battling against very difficult environment in which we work, but it can be done. It really can be done. Some of those dads like Ollie and Brad and some of the mums that have gone on to be amazing, and we now have our wild grandchildren, we're able to see them long term, how some of them are turning out and being amazing people. I don't want you to think it's impossible, and just because it's difficult it doesn't mean we should give up. So what we're going to do this afternoon is bring together the learning from this morning and the thoughts that we've had from this morning, because all the recent cases have involved young parents, there's been domestic abuse, there's been neglect, there's been learning difficulty present in some of them as well. We're going to bring them together and work together on our tables to try and think inside the lived experience of the people involved in a case study. So when you come back, you'll have your case study and we'll all work together on the tables. We'll explain a bit more about it, but it's bearing in mind, Alison said that the rate of the increased risk of infant mortality has gone up to 75% for the children of young parents, and we have absolute evidence of that in Cornwall with our latest reviews. So it is serious, but there's stuff we can do about it if we work together. And that's the end. So thank you for, I've still got 5 minutes. Would you like to ask any questions? Thank you, Jen. Honestly, I do all this and I'll sound really posh and then I'll just crumble at the end. And I'm going to let you know as well I crumbled at the beginning, because on the way here I had to pull into a labour because I'd put my shirt on inside out. So sometimes I sound brainy, but I ain't really. So have you got any questions? Or are you just all really hungry? Everyone's thinking, don't ask any, don't ask any. No?
Joe, can you tell people about the awards Wild has won?
Yeah. Oh, we won a lot of awards. Do you know our first award was back in John Major's day, and we won the health of the... Can anyone remember the health of the nation? That's what one of their... and we won one of those a long time ago. But recently we've won the GlaxoSmithKline King's Fund Award. And I say GlaxoSmithKline is big pharma. But King's Fund, really, for those of you in health, King's Fund is really posh. And we were the overall national winners, and it was very glamorous and exciting. But it was a win for Cornwall, because I really am so proud to be working with all of you. It's just amazing to come from the voluntary sector to be able to speak on the same platform as Ray and as Alison, who are like super posh and know loads, to be accepted by all our statutory colleagues. Yeah, it's for all of us. The awards, we have won several awards and we're very proud of them, but we're proud of working in partnership, and without working in partnership we wouldn't have got any of it. So thank you all. Oh yeah, you can. Oh, all right then. Yeah, we have done a case study, but I've forgotten what it's for. It's for the local government. See, let Alison do it.
So I just didn't want Joe to forget that the WILD project is a case study in a new local government association briefing to councillors around the importance of supporting young parents. So with other case studies around the country, WILD is in there and Cornwall is in there. So that'll be out maybe even today on the LGA website. It's co-badged with Public Health England. So just a reminder to councillors how important this work is and exemplifying some of the best practice going wild.
Thank you, thank you. Do you want to do the lunch bit now?
I'd just like to say three things, Joe. One is, if colleagues don't know, that WILD brings money into Cornwall as well to support young parents. It's not just from just local. So
Oh yes, we get a substantial amount of money from the council, for which we're very grateful, but it's dwarfed by the rest of the money we bring in. Yeah, this year we're looking at bringing in about 650,000 for the year. So yeah, thank you.
And the last thing I want to say is, you know the quote you put up there about the select committee going, oh, you know, the impact of poverty on children. That is almost directly the same quote as the select committee in 1882.
Yeah.
So let's not get our hopes up.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Let's do something local, is what I mean.
Well, yes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.